Okay, so today we're gonna learn how to complete the square. So today's lesson is just an introduction, and what we're going to do is only solve the problems that have a 1 in front of the x squared term. So completing the square has 5 steps that we need to follow. So when we solve the quadratic equation using completing the square, we need to first check to see if the number in front of x squared is a 1. If it is, then we proceed to step 2. And step 2 is where we move the constant so that it's all by itself on one side of the equal sign. Then step 3 is to take the b term, or the number in front of x, divide it by 2 and square it. Then we take that number and add it to both sides of the equation. Then step 4, once we've added that number, it turns the left side into a perfect square trinomial that we can factor. And then you'll combine the terms on the right side, and then you'll use the square root method to solve. So let's see this all in action, and I'm going to walk you through step by step. Now, all of our questions today, or all our examples today, are going to start at step 2. But I'm going to talk about step 1 as I do it. So my first example is here. And again, the instructions say to solve by completing the square. On the test on Thursday, you are going to have to demonstrate that you know how to complete the square. So you will have to follow these steps. So again, step number 1 is to check to see that the a term equals 1. Now, if you recall, standard form for our quadratics is ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. So when they're talking about the a and the b in the steps, this is the a that they're referring to. So all of our problems today, or examples today, the number in front of x squared is 1, so we're just going to go to step 2. Step 2 says to move the constant. So I'm going to move the constant to the right side by using an inverse operation. So I end up with x squared minus 4x. I'm going to leave a blank space and set it equal to 14. Now, step 3 is to take the b term. So the number in front of x squared, the number in front of x, divide it by 2 and square it. So essentially it's b divided by 2 squared. So my b was a -4, divide it by 2 and square it. Now, it's going to be important lesson here. So I'm going to divide it by 2 and I get -2 squared. And I get 4. This is going to be the number that I will add to both sides. It's always going to be adding, because even if I square a negative number like I just did, it always turns it positive. So in that blank space, I'm going to put the number that I just found by taking the b term, dividing it by 2, and squaring it. Now, step 4 is to factor the left. So in step 4, I'm going to factor the perfect square trinomial I just found. So I'm factoring the left side, and I'm adding the right side. Now, big hint here. Don't rack your brain trying to figure out what are the factors of 4 that give me -4. I'm going to give you a big hint here. If you just remember what you got when you divided the b term by 2, that's going to be the number in your binomial. So this will factor into x minus 2 squared. Then I'm going to add the right side, and I get 18. So the number that you're going to put into the binomial squared is this number that you got when you divided b by 2. Now, my next step, step 5, is now I apply the square root method. So just like you did on the quiz you just took, so step number 5 is square root. So I'm going to square root both sides. Cancels the square. X minus 2 drops out. Plus minus square root of 18. I need to break that square root of 18 down. So if I work it out over here, I could make this 9 times 2. You could do 6 times 3, but you got to keep going. So the square root of 18 will simplify into 3 square root of 2. I still have the x minus 2 over here. My goal was to isolate x, so I add the 2, and x is equal to 2 plus or minus 3 square root of 2. And you're done. Now again, on a standardized test, they may pull them apart and say that x equals 2 plus 3 square root 2 or 2 minus 3 square root of 2. Because these are your intercepts. That's your first example. Let's try another one. All we're going to do is practice these 5 steps over and over again. Let's try another one. Step number 1, check to see if the number in front of x squared is a 1. And then you're going to move the constant. Step number 2 is move the constant. Next, I'm going to take the b term. Let me leave a little blank space here too, so you can see it. So blank space, and then equals 1. So now I take the b term, which is 6, divide it by 2, and I'm going to be squaring it. 6 divided by 2 is 3. 3 squared is 9. So I'm going to be adding 9 to both sides. X squared plus 6x. Let me factor it first. So then my next step is to factor the trinomial. Again, remember what you got when you divided by 2. And that's what you're just going to put here. And then 1 plus 9 is 10. I now apply the square root method. X plus 3 equals plus or minus square root of 10. Subtract the 3. And x is equal to negative 3 plus or minus the square root of 10. And I'm done. Let's try another one. Again, check to see that this number in front of x squared is a 1. It is. Step 2, move the constant. Leave a blank space. Take the b term, divide it by 2, square it. 2 divided by 2 is 1. 1 squared is 1. I'm adding 1 to both sides. Factor the trinomial. So again, it's just the b term divided by 2. Apply the square root method. X plus 1 equals plus or minus square root of 6. If I try to break down the 6, I get 2 times 3. There aren't any pairs. Move the 1 over. Negative 1 plus or minus square root of 6. And you're done. Now, notice all of the examples I just did, the problems, the b term was even. Now I'm going to do one where the b term is an odd number and I get a fraction. Let's try one where the b term is an odd number. The process is still the same. Okay, check first. It's got a 1. Move the constant. X squared plus 7x, blank space here, equals negative 12, blank space. Take the b term, divide it by 2. Square it. I'm not going to make it a decimal, leave it a fraction. 7 squared is 49, 2 squared is 4. So I'm adding 49 over 4 to both sides. Now, again, don't stress out and think, how am I ever going to factor that trinomial? Remember what you got when you divided by 2. Now, the hard part is doing negative 12 plus 49 over 4, which really isn't that bad. I'm going to turn negative 12 into 48 over 4. And it's negative. So I just turned 12 over 1. Common denominator of 4 made it 48 over 4. I subtract those because the signs are different. And I get 1/4. Apply the square root method. X plus 7/2 is equal to plus or minus, and this is actually a perfect square. Real quick, subtract the 7/2. X is equal to negative 7 over 2 plus or minus 1 over 2. Notice the radical disappeared, so I actually have to figure this out. Negative 7/2 plus 1/2 and negative 7/2 minus 1/2. Negative 6 over 2 is negative 3. Negative 8 over 2 is negative 4. Your two answers are x equals negative 3, x equals negative 4. Okay, so our last example, again, the steps are the same. We're going to check for step 1. We're going to make sure that the number in front of x squared is a 1. Then we're going to move the constant to the other side. So we're going to add 6 to both sides. Leave a blank space. Take the b term, divide it by 2. Square it. And we'll be adding 9/4 to both sides of the equation. We now need to factor the left side. So it factors into x minus 3 over 2 squared. We now need to add 6 plus 9/4. I'm going to look for a common denominator between 1 and 6. That'll be 24 over 4. 24 plus 9 gives me 33 over 4. I'm now going to apply the square root method. Square root both sides. X minus 3/2 is equal to plus or minus the square root of 33 over the square root of 4. I can square root them separately, which takes care of my radical in the denominator. And now I'll move the 3/2 to the other side. Final answer here will be x is equal to 3 over 2 plus or minus square root 33 over 2. If you want to combine them and just have one denominator of 2, and you're done. Okay, we will finish the last examples tomorrow. Your homework tonight is just the worksheet. The textbook problems that are at the end of this note file will be homework tomorrow night. So tonight's homework is the worksheet that's attached to today's assignment.